Welcome to those here in the room, welcome to those on Zoom, and to our wonderful artists joining us today for the fourth and final installment of the Artist Lecture Series for this fall of 2025. My name is Carrie Chema, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the head of instructional photography here at Evergreen. I'm filling in for Shaw Osha, who normally facilitates this. And I'm very grateful to be here today for this talk from Travis Neel and Erin Charpentier. And it's in conjunction with an exhibition that they have up in Gallery Photoland right here on campus on the first floor of Evans Hall. Has anybody seen the show? Yeah, cool, great. I invite you to come over and check it out if you haven't. It'll be up through December 14th on the first floor of Evans Hall in Gallery Photoland. Okay, so our student introducer today is Marissa Marquardt, who is the 2025-26 photography intern in the Evergreen Multimedia Arts Internship Program. So Marissa's going to come up and give us an introduction to the artists who we'll be hearing from today. Thanks.
Let's see. My name is Marissa. Erin Charpentier and Travis Neel's work has been described to work at the unruly edges of art and urban ecology to explore the possibilities of collaborative survival within the weedy entanglements of human disturbed landscapes. Through using ecological projects, they connect those human-disturbed landscapes, the people within them, and the native plants that inhabit those landscapes. Their collaborative work has been supported and recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts, Headlands Center for the Arts, Southwest Contemporary, the British Cultural Council, the Brooklyn Art Museum, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Portland Art Museum, the Atlantic Center for the Arts, the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, numerous DIY spaces across the United States and Canada, among many others. One of those others is our very own Gallery Photoland. An exhibition of their work entitled Future Nature, Cultivating the Conditions and Ongoingness is currently on view at Gallery Photoland, which is on the first floor of Evans Hall through December 14th. Working with production and installation of this work myself here at Gallery Photoland, I see the care that was put into this ongoing endeavor to increase biodiversity and continue to connect people and the nature around them. The to-scale prints let you dive deep into the entanglements of stems and roots and beg the question, what is a weed? And now off to our artists.
Wonderful. We're going to share our screen really quick.
All right. Hold it. That should be working good.
Great. Okay. Let's get started.
Yeah, I'm Travis Neel.
And I'm Erin Charpentier. We're very excited to be with you today. Thank you to Carrie and Marissa for those introductions. That was really lovely. As Marissa said, we have a collaborative practice, and we've been working together around 15 years. Currently, our research sits at the intersection of socially engaged art and urban ecology. We utilize art as a framework to explore the possibility of collaborative survival within the weedy entanglements of human disturbed landscapes. Another thing to know is that we are serial collaborators. We often work with other people in the creation of our work, so beyond our internal collaboration, I think everything here is done in collaboration with others. So for this lecture, we've curated a selection of past works that show a trajectory of thinking and themes around alternative ways for humans to be together in the world, from collective imaginaries to communes, to co-housing, and then expanding into ways of being together with our more than human counterparts. When we were invited to do this lecture, we were given a prompt to present on our career trajectory. So we were thinking about that, and we wanted to just share with you that we lived in the Northwest for many years across Washington and Oregon. And reflecting back, we realized that this lecture series at Evergreen had an impact on our creative practice. Back in January of 2010, we were sitting in the audience of this same lecture series, listening to the artist and architect Fritz Haag lecture about his socially engaged ecological artwork. So that lecture was one of our early touch points into the ideas and themes and forms around socially engaged art that we would spend the next decade or so exploring. So it's really an honor to be here today and be able to participate in the same lecture series and to share our practice with you all.
So shortly after that lecture, we enrolled in a Master of Fine Arts program in socially engaged art at Portland State University. And this is documentation of a work called the Radical Imagination Gymnasium, or RIG, that we created at the tail end of our time in graduate school. So RIG was this multi-phase project that unfolded over the course of a year, and it included a publication, a series of public workshops, and an exhibition that worked to strengthen and articulate the radical imagination. And we were defining the radical imagination as this collective process, not as an individual possession. And we envision the Radical Imagination Gymnasium as the community that spontaneously arises when people work out these muscles together.
So under late capitalism, our imaginations are dictated by market logic, and they're put to use by developing new ways of capitalizing on resource and exploiting others for individual gain, or making and selling things, rather than resisting these systems and imagining new ways of being together based on other values like care or cooperation. So within this context, we set up the Radical Imagination Gymnasium, which was an exhibition and a site for exercising these underused muscles. So as part of this exhibition, we developed a workout plan to strengthen the muscles, which we believed had atrophied from underuse.
In phase one of this work, we conducted long-form interviews with theorists, activists, and artists to discuss collective imagination. The interviews were compiled into a zine that we then distributed in the exhibition. Some of the interviews included Max Haven, who teaches at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and wrote a book about the radical imagination, and NYU professor Steve Duncombe, who teaches history and politics of media and wrote the book Reimagining Politics in the Age of Fantasy.
So this image just shows sort of the workout schedule that we developed and research related to the project, which sort of met you at the entryway of the exhibitions, sort of calendar of events and bibliography of research and case studies.
And then we had a series of workouts.
The audio just cut.
We're not sure if you can hear us, so we're going to type in.
We can hear you.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Oh, great.
So everything's all good? Should I go ahead?
I guess we'll continue. So do you want to?
Yeah. All right. So for this exhibition, we curated a series of workshops or workouts for strengthening the radical imagination. So, okay, we already talked about this as being a sort of calendar of events and a bibliography of research and case studies.
The first workout as part of RIG was facilitated by the writer and activist Walida Emerisha, the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction Stories from Social Justice Movements. Walida facilitated an activity centered around collective visioning, world building, and science fiction writing on social justice issues. So participants would work in small groups to create science fiction stories around the social justice issues that they were working on in their lives.
These photos document some of the workshop activities. We screen printed these world builder stationery sheets for the groups to work on. And then these stories and posters generated in the workouts became part of the exhibition. So it's a generative exhibition.
Another exercise that we organized was this exercise that incorporated theater of the oppressed techniques as a point of departure to non-verbally explore ideas of utopia. Theater of the oppressed is a system of physical exercises, improvisations, and games developed by Augusto Boal.
All right, so we're going to move on to another project. This project's called Tables Turned, and we created it a few years later to explore how the radical imagination manifests in physical space. So the work was what we're calling a research monument that attempted to recover the not too visible legacy of American communitarian socialist spatial design, specifically looking at the industrial design of American experiments in communism from the 1800s, So the Shaker community and the United Perfectionists in particular. The exhibition paired recreated objects from these communities alongside with found objects that were created by these experiments. So the centerpiece of the show is a Lazy Susan table, which was adopted and patented by the Oneida community, produced for the ease of the communal dining experience. Across from the table, there was this antique trap that was designed and manufactured by the Oneida community as a funding source for their attempt at forming utopian society, which to us sort of served as a reminder of the violence of larger systems these communities were entangled with, specifically settler colonialism in the American West.
Another component of this artwork was that the centerpiece Lazy Susan table was activated throughout the exhibition. So we had a few guest artists host gatherings around the sculpture, including Evergreen alumni Ariana Jacob, who hosted Political Idea Potluck, and Ryan Wilson Paulson and Anna Gray, who hosted an event called Kids Table Scene here. Also on the slide is the printed ephemera from the exhibition. We digitized a typeface from historic Shaker documents for the publication piece of this work.
This next piece is called Living Building Gift from 2021. It's a functional worm composting bin based on architecture, the architectural floor plan of the Utopian Shaker communal dwelling from Mount Lebanon, New York. So by juxtaposing these forms, we're wondering how we could compost these imperfect human experiments into teachings about alternative ways of being together in multi-species collaborations. So during the pandemic, this piece was exhibited in an outdoor sculpture exhibition in Chicago. And then afterwards, it was moved to its permanent home in an urban farm in Chicago called Garbage Hill Farm, which is a project by Jendo Les Reyes.
This work, The Shapes of Cooperation Total, is a video from 2021, which depicts a small fictional housing cooperative working through the stages of consensus to determine whether they will practice income sharing. This improvised work was created over the course of a week with a group of actors and non-actors using techniques from Theater of the Oppressed and devised theater. The actors are essentially improvising the consensus process as described in the Consensus Handbook by Seeds of Change. We're going to play a 2-minute clip from this video. And one thing to note as you watch is that the camera is positioned to always show members of the group that are listening. And then there's a jump edit every time someone from the group begins to speak. So we never see the speaker, we only ever see the listeners.
All right, so now that we've had a little bit of time to kind of look into some numbers and stuff, I've written them down so I'll go ahead and share this with you. But bringing back to the table this conversation of shared income, which we had kind of diverse opinions about. We definitely wanted more information, so I'll kind of share with what we have. So pooled together, we'd have about $5,700 a month. We're going to round just because it's a couple dollars, right, give or take, but $5,700 a month. $2,000 of that would go towards all our expenses, would cover literally everything as far as like mortgage, all the different utility bills, etc., internet, all that good stuff. So that leaves us with $3,700. So if you guys just want to factor in the number of $3,700 after the fact, right, we'll factor that in. So that's everybody's income pooled. After all expenses for the house, $3,700. And then maybe we want to possibly bring up ideas about negotiating allowances from that, or again, all for the sake of a hypothetical that we can then pitch as a proposal. Yeah?
Great.
Let me know if there's anything else kind of we wanted information on, and I can share what I've got.
So to summarize, I guess that's $750 each a month, right? You said $3,700?
$3,700.
Okay, so $750 each at the end of the day.
You are good with numbers.
For our allowance.
Assuming. I don't know. I'm just going to trust that, yeah, sure.
Allowance and overall everything, all in, $750 before we do any of the,
And that's monthly.
monthly.
Yeah.
So we're talking,
What would that be weekly? $750 divided by 4?
about 183, 175.
Checking your math.
180, 183.
So maybe we do a thing where people just jump in and give some thoughts.
Impulses. Feel free to.
Come back to me.
Okay.
Have some reservations. Just slightly. 180 a week is interesting.
Tight budget for you?
Huh?
Is that a tight budget for you?
I'll just throw this out there, keeping in mind that we're sharing a meal. All right.
Okay, so we're going to transition now to talk about the body of work that we have up at the Photoland Gallery, which presents documentation of our creative research project called the Mesquite Mile, a project that works to cultivate the conditions of ongoingness and the human disturbed ecologies of West Texas. We lived and worked in West Texas for many years. Mesquite Mile was a collaborative project with the artists Kim Carlsrud and landscape architect Daniel Phillips. So things to know, this was a very large multi-year collaborative work with many side projects and tangents and manifestations sort of wrapped into this larger narrative. This image you're seeing right here is an image of cotton and wind farms on the Llano Estacado in West Texas. This image gives you some context about the region. The region is referred to as the Tablelands. It's a giant semi-arid plateau that's home to the endangered shortgrass prairie ecosystems and the largest patch of cotton in the world. Much of the language that we use to describe our work comes from the environmental humanities and the frameworks developed by the anthropologist Anna Singh, the researcher Donna Haraway, and their collaborators and contemporaries. So Singh says that we live in a world of weeds, a world of human ecological disturbance that stretches around the planet. Here, Singh's referring to the global impacts of modern human life on the planet and environment, which have inadvertently created the conditions for weeds to thrive. These weeds, these creatures of empire, are plants, animals, microorganisms, and fungi that thrive in human disturbance. Our project is interested in thinking through the global phenomenon of weediness through the weeds that are situated locally to us, wherever we are.
So weediness has a number of characteristics that we explore in our research practice. For one, weediness of plants is the result of human infrastructure. Weeds are opportunistic. They take advantage of ecosystems disturbed by human behavior and infrastructures. Weeds love disturbance. They flourish in it, but they also make disturbance. They're not passive agents in our landscapes. Weeds are agentive forces that are taking advantage and making disturbance in human disturbed spaces. You may recognize some of these passages that we're putting up on the screen. They're from the zine that we produced for the exhibition. We're going to drop in these conditions of weediness throughout this part of the presentation, and mostly these are quotes from Anna Singh.
So in the case of our research, we center the weediness of the mesquite tree, the thorny and charismatic protagonist of our work. It's an organism that has expanded its range from the American Southwest and Central South America to Australia, India, and Hawaii. Globally and locally to the Llano Estacado, mesquite is considered an invasive weed. Weeds are auto-rewilders, meaning that they're autonomous non-human species that insert themselves into landscapes where they're previously absent, doing so in surprising and unexpected ways, such that they may be considered out of place or invasive. In West Texas, the auto-rewilding mesquite inserts itself into landscapes with its companions, the migratory oriole that builds nests in its branches, the symbiotic mycorrhizal fungi and nitrogen-fixing bacteria in its root system, the Christmas cholla, which is a cactus that grows intertwined with its trunk, and wild grasses and wildflowers that thrive in its nitrogen-rich understory. We're working with the mesquite tree as the megaflora of the region, but we're also working with all of these companion species as well. So this slide shows a mature honey mesquite tree on the left that was transplanted from property that was soon to be raised for development on the outskirts of town to the front yard of a house in the urban core of Lubbock, Texas, where it can be cared for and managed. So on the right, you can also see a number of wildflowers, wild grasses, and cacti that were transplanted along with the mesquite tree.
So another characteristic of weeds is that they are organisms that are never fully integrated into capitalist designs. Weediness is a response to human actions without submitting to control. In West Texas, these designs are that of big agriculture, ranching, oil extraction, and urban development, where the mesquite is considered a nuisance to these sites of production.
The Mesquite Mile proposed an intentional exchange between the urban and rural context of our region. We worked with ranchers to transplant the mesquite trees and other species from their ranches and ag land, where again they were perceived of as a nuisance. and also this sort of like edge space land, like the soon to be raised for development plot. So this is an image of one such rancher. His name is Mike. He runs and ranches 600 acres of property to raise cattle outside of Lubbock. We met Mike on Craigslist, actually, where we made sort of a peculiar post looking for people to allow us to remove these unwanted trees. Mike responded and told us how much he hated mesquite trees, and he was happy to let us take as many of them as we wanted from his property.
So the Mesquite Mile project is located in Lubbock, Texas, which is the largest city on the Llano Estacado, which spans from eastern New Mexico into northwestern Texas. Lubbock is represented in this image on the left, and you can see from satellite view that Lubbock is this large concrete pad surrounded by thousands of acres of pivot irrigation for cotton production. The triangles in this map are sites that we located nuisance trees, and then we moved them into this green rectangle, which is enlarged here on the right-hand side of the slide. This is the neighborhood in which our project is located. It's called the Heart of Lubbock neighborhood. And all of these yellow rectangles are sites that are hosting the Mesquite Mile project. And then also of note, this is the neighborhood's floodplain.
And that's the neighborhood that we lived in as well. Our relationship to weeds is complex and shaped by human culture. One is not born, but rather becomes a weed. You can imagine that one becomes a weed in relation to vast machinery that works to naturalize capitalism, property, and the modernist landscape. But what happens when an organism doesn't fit into these human plans? If you don't fit into these plans, the dominant cultural frameworks will label these organisms as weeds. Weeds can be noxious, benign, and beneficial. Their feralities compose the landscape of the Anthropocene, our new geological epoch in which human infrastructures and market geographies are changing Earth systems and causing a massive extinction event around the world. This video documents Site 5 from the Mesquite Mile, the first growing season after sowing seeds and planting a mesquite sapling in this basin that we dug for rainwater harvesting. For this work, we redesigned a front yard to emulate shortgrass prairie ecosystems, and the plants were propagated from seeds we collected from wild spaces in West Texas.
Anna Singh writes that so many of us are Anthropocene weeds. Weeds are creatures of disturbance. We make use of opportunities, we climb over each other and form collaborations with those who allow us to proliferate. The key task is to figure out what kinds of weediness allow for landscapes of more than human livability. Depending on the context, mesquite can be considered noxious, benign, or even beneficial, and our work is making the argument that mesquite's weediness allows for more than human livability in the urban core of Lubbock. The honey mesquite tree is a shrubby, native invasive plant on the Llano Estacado of West Texas. It is weedy because it's an agent of force not fully integrated into the capitalist designs of various human infrastructure projects in West Texas. It's not useful to the industrialized agriculture, oil production, ranching, and urban development of the region. In fact, it's a nuisance to these infrastructures, and it's often eradicated to make way for them, but it's also a tree that's native to West Texas. The first work that we made exploring this dynamic of human-altered landscape in the mesquite is a work called Mesquite Migration. And what you're seeing in this video is a mesquite tree being dug up and migrated through 3 human-disturbed landscapes, beginning with a cattle ranch, and then moving through cotton fields, and then finally through the urban streets of the largest city in the South Plains, Lubbock, and then planted into a front yard. This is a 90-second clip of a 14-minute full-length version that's on display in the gallery. The full-length version approximates the real travel distance of the migration journey of this tree.
The land of the Llano Estacado and its adjoining ecosystems have been adorned by human and mesquite entanglements for thousands of years. The mesquite tree is the megaflora of the region, and it arrived north of the Rio Grande River 13,000 years ago when the now extinct megafauna of our region fostered their dispersal from Mexico. Over the decades, centuries, and millennia, the mesquite tree was culturally selected for the edibility of its seed pod and was a significant source of food and medicine for indigenous people throughout the Southwest, from Texas to California. Lubbock is located on the traditional homelands of the Comanche, Mescalero, Apache, and Kiowa people. So mesquite produces an edible and delicious bean that's high in protein and carbohydrates that people still mill and eat to this day. People use mesquite flour to make baked goods, tortillas, and beverages. So on the left is an image of some mesquite sprouts from the dung of buffalo in Caprock State Park, 90 miles north of Lubbock. Wildlife like buffalo love to eat mesquite. Their stomachs scarify the seeds, and their dung produces the perfect conditions for the seeds to sprout. On the right is an image of a transplanted mesquite in the heart of Lubbock on Site 4 of the Mesquite Mile.
Post-colonial transformations of the bioregion have caused a massive shift. The current landscape is the result of the violent removal of indigenous people and their lifeways, as well as buffalo, prairie dogs, and keystone species. These losses, along with modern wildfire suppression and management practices, create the conditions for mesquite to thrive in the edges of the industrialized agriculture, cattle ranching, and oil production that have replaced the region's shortgrass prairie ecosystem. Mesquite went from being a stewarded cultural resource to becoming perceived as a much maligned invasive native tree. As a result, the honey mesquite has become a victim of ecological forgetting and is the subject of a sustained campaign of eradication. But humans can't control mesquite. It doesn't fit into our plans.
Weeds make odd kin. As Donna Haraway says in her book, Staying with the Trouble, we require each other in unexpected ways, collaborations, and combinations. In hot compost piles, we become with each other or not at all.
Mesquite make odd kin. Like buffalo and humans, cows also love to eat the mesquite bean. Cows are one of the reasons why the tree's range has spread so widely in Texas. It's a camp follower. It follows ranched herds of cattle. That's why the tree is such a nuisance. The landscape of the Llano is heavily used for ranching. This map documents a work that we did called Mother Mesquite. During the West Texas mega drought of 2022, we collected cow patties from Mike's ranch and germinated 100 trees from seeds that had been scarified by the stomachs of his cattle. In times of drought, mesquite is resilient due to its long 40 to 50 foot taproot. It can reach water tables that other plants cannot. Mesquite can flower and fruit with less than 5 millimeters of rain, and it's oftentimes one of the only available food sources for herds of cattle during times of drought. So after collecting these seeds and germinating them, and then we matured a group of saplings in a greenhouse, we gave away these mesquite saplings along with what we called certificates of entanglement. And this map details the distribution of these sort of juvenile trees throughout the city of Lubbock. And this video depicts other ways that cattle use mesquite trees. They'll shelter in the gentle shade of trees, and they'll also use mesquite trees to scratch those harder places.
So a quadrat is a four-sided figure which delimits the boundaries of a sample plot. A quadrat sampling has been widely used in plant studies to conduct data on species present in a given area. So for this work, we created 3 quadrat paintings in the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and photographed 269 sample plots across Site 3 of Mesquite Mile. Each quadrat painting utilizes photographic space to document the biodiversity of the Mesquite Mile project. Quadrats allow us to transport in portable format a 2-scale representation of the site into other contexts. So much like the literal assisted migration of the mesquite tree, we're transporting these plants to different contexts. It's an opportunity for us to bring these up to eye level, to bring focus to these sometimes native, more invasive plants that can be easily overlooked when they are perceived of as weedy in front yards, when you're walking over them or driving past them.
Weeds survive in non-rationalized edge spaces. Weediness is born from and in contrast to settler rationalization, disturbing the clean grid lines of property lines.
In the Southwest, water is becoming more and more scarce due to the extractive agribusiness and petroleum-based industries in West Texas. All of the water for these industries comes from the rapidly depleting Ogallala Aquifer that spans from West Texas to Omaha, Nebraska. So as climate change threatens livability on a human-damaged planet, our continued survival demands that we learn best how to live and die with the entanglements we have. This video is an aerial view of Site 5 on the Mesquite Mile.
Weeds embrace both terrifying and hopeful ecologies. Weeds are active, morally ambiguous, and feisty. They have agilities which allow them to coordinate with and thrive within human infrastructures.
So in a hotter and drier Southwest, is it possible that the honey mesquite is a tree of a future nature? A nature that emerges from what has become second nature, the nature of human disturbance, markets, and capital. Can mesquite compost what is second nature into teachings about livability and resilience in a rapidly shifting climate? The ethnobotanist Enrique Salmon asserts that life in any environment is only viable when humans view their surroundings as kin, and our roles as essential for the survival of the more than human. Our project suggests that living well in a multi-species model requires that we pay attention to our entanglements with our more than human counterparts, even the weedy ones. So this image was a proposal for Site 6 of the Mesquite Mile. This was a parking lot that was being used in a real estate deal to create 5 acres of self-storage in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood. So along with our neighbors, we advocated against this development at public meetings. Eventually, we sort of made a deal and the developers offered to donate half an acre to community development. 2 years later, the land was transferred to our partners at Habitat for Humanity, who are going to develop it into affordable housing in the neighborhood, which is desperately needed. We received a National Endowment for the Arts design grant to support the landscape design of this piece of property for housing development. But since that time, Habitat lost their funding, and the NEA, we lost our funding from the NEA, both due to these federal shifts in funding priorities. So for now, this site remains a parking lot and a question.
Weeds insert themselves into landscapes in surprising ways. Weeds are agentive forces in our landscapes. They make decisions and interact with their environments. The image on the left is a photograph of Palmer's amaranth, the seed of Palmer's amaranth. Palmer's amaranth is the spontaneous urban plant that farmers of West Texas call the careless weed because it could care less where it grows. The center image depicts a Palmer's amaranth that has sprouted in the cracks of a sidewalk that runs east to west in the heart of the Lubbock neighborhood. Careless weed is a ruderal weed. The word ruderal comes from the Latin word meaning rubble. Careless weed is one of the predominant plants found in yards throughout the Mesquite Mile, and it's a plant species that's first to colonize disturbed lands. The plant plagues cotton farmers in the South Plains because it has developed herbicidal resistance to at least 8 different herbicides, and it's considered a superweed. Like mesquite, Palmer's amaranth has noxious, benign, and beneficial viralities. So community engagement and input are at the very core of our work on the Mesquite Mile. From the inception of the project, we gathered and acted upon feedback from our fellow neighbors in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood, and we began our work with a community-wide survey that received over 75 responses. 30 respondents offered to volunteer their space to the project. So from the start, we had more interest in participating than we had resources and capacity. In addition to the survey, we would attend monthly community meetings, and we organized work parties and field trips to the ranch, and we did mesquite harvesting outings. On the slide is just some survey results that reveal that 95 to 98% of respondents were supportive of the small interventions that we were proposing to do in our neighborhood, like building rain gardens and installing green infrastructure like curb cuts. So 55% of respondents wanted to see more trees in the neighborhood.
So these next few slides we're just going to show some of the data that we collected from the survey, so you can get a sense of whether people agree or disagree with these statements about the neighborhood. So just really quickly, we'll just point out, so it looks like a lot of people are driving in the neighborhood, not a lot of walking. Alleys do not feel clean, safe, or inviting, and yards are not perceived as lush with plants or trees. You can see that people were mostly not familiar with rain gardens. Most responses are in that less familiar side of this chart. So when people took this survey, they were asked this question, and then there was a little bit of informational, educational component, and then people were asked if they would support these interventions in their neighborhood. So this is the familiarity, and then afterwards you can see that 98% of people were supportive of installing rain gardens either on their property or at least in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood, which is a pretty small neighborhood. Go ahead. This next slide is about familiarity with curb cuts. Again, you can see rather low familiarity, and then a little bit of information was provided, and afterwards you can see that 92% of respondents are supportive of installing curb cuts either on their property or in the neighborhood. And this slide shows importance of benefits of improving yards with rain barrels, rain gardens, and curb cuts. And people are saying the top three answers are for establishing natural beauty, reducing flooding, and benefits to insects and other species.
So as artists, we used a range of methods to reduce alienation to plants and humans in the urban environment and to increase multi-species awareness with this mesquite model project. So this project is all about utilizing a diverse set of methodologies to create supportive human-to-human connections in a hyper-local, neighborhood-based way, but also to move beyond human connections to expand the notion of community to the plants that dwell alongside humans in an urban ecosystem. And this is just sort of a table of some of our methodologies, of a description of some of the different methodologies.
This slide just shows some documentation of some of these engagements that we did, some walks, workshops, work parties. There's some mesquite harvesting and tasting, and then some zines and ephemera from workshops. So weeds cultivate the conditions of ongoingness, making use of abandonment and allowing for more than human livability.
This is an aerial view of Site 4, the Mesquite Mile, and we're going to use this site as a case study to show you how we design space for multi-species flourishing. So this project is designed to expand perspectives around shortgrass prairie plants and the spontaneous urban vegetation that's present on site. Additionally, the sites are designed to provide solar cooling through gentle shade, to mitigate flooding and mitigate toxins and stormwater runoff, and to increase the biocultural diversity of a neighborhood. And this is our site right here that we're going to be examining.
And that's also the site that the quadrats document. So the question of any urban afforestation project is how to get new trees established without over-reliance on irrigation. So our solution to this question was to irrigate using stormwater with rainwater harvesting features in the landscape. So we installed curb cuts, gutters, rain barrels, rain basins that use the grade of the surface to collect and pool water into depressions in the earth that were then seeded and planted with wild plants. So currently the city of Lubbock is designed in a way that sort of treats water like a weed. The city is designed to waste rainwater. It treats rainwater as a problem. The street is a physical manifestation of this value system. So the street is designed to divert rainwater away from landscapes rather than into landscapes, waterways, and aquifers. So often in the design of cities, the living nets of vegetation and topsoil are replaced with impervious asphalt, concrete, and buildings, inducing rainwater to rush across the land and drain out of the hydrological system. So our project proposes that we all value water and treat rainwater as the foundation of the life-sustaining hydrologic cycle. So this value system is important everywhere. In the semi-arid shortgrass prairie, it's especially important where water is really scarce.
Yeah. This is an example of how we're designing spaces to harvest and utilize annual rainwater by directing it from a roof into permeable and vegetative basins. So the annual precipitation of Lubbock is about 20 inches of rain. Compare that to Olympia, which I think is 50 inches of rain annually. Lubbock does not get a lot of rain. One note that is that you can see in our designs, we don't stop the flow of water downhill, we just slow it. And in a few minutes, we're going to show you what these vegetative basins look like once they've been planted and their soil becomes sponge-like during rain events. And that sponge-like soil, when it's planted, consistently releases water over a period of weeks or months rather than just dumping that water out of the hydrological system.
So what you're seeing here is an aerial drone shot of the site in progress. You can see the placement of the basins and the trees as well. And importantly, the provision of a pedestrian pathway through the site. That's this sort of like undulating line that goes throughout. This neighborhood has no north-south sidewalks. So we incorporated protected pedestrian corridors that are shaded by the new trees planted in the design. Just for scale, this is like a 4,000 square foot space.
Weeds seize the time. They have the agility to sustain themselves and during times of drought or other scarcity.
Here's some process shots of Site 3. You can see the work we did to dig out the basins and then planting the trees. In this case, this is a netleaf hackberry, which is another water-wise and weedy native tree.
So in wrangling permissions to do things like curb cuts, like this cut into the curb to allow water into the yard to irrigate our rain basins, we discovered that the city doesn't have any processes or policies in place for doing these types of interventions in urban public space. So what you're seeing here is the first permitted residential curb cut in Lubbock, Texas, along with a memorandum of understanding between the homeowner of the property and the city of Lubbock. And we think of this memorandum of understanding as, or the civic intervention as an artwork. And when we exhibit it, we pin it to the wall with mesquite thorns.
Weeds make use of abandonment. This site is also designed to utilize phytotechnology to degrade organics from stormwater runoff. The basins that collect stormwater from the street are planted with sunflowers and prairie grasses, which can remediate hazardous materials in the runoff. Stormwater runoff has lots of heavy metals because of brake dust and petroleum-based organics. Prairie plants with their deep roots are well suited to remediate this runoff. So the plants either turn the heavy metals into tissue or they hold heavy metals in the soil and prevent them from moving downstream. On this slide, another thing to note, mesquite is a hardwood. So the mesquite tree of our region doesn't get very big. They're kind of shrubby, like we said, but their wood is really wonderful for carving and building with. So this is a photograph of the permitted curb cut that we made, and the frame that it's in is made out of mesquite wood that we collected and processed into this picture frame. Mesquite trees often host an insect called the mesquite borer. So you can see some of the borers that were in this wood in the frame.
Let's see. I think I need to play this for you. So the street that Site 4, the Mesquite Mile, is on is a major thoroughfare for access to a public high school and commercial street. And if you were to spend the day at this intersection, you would encounter school-aged children, dog walkers, bicyclists, wheelchair users, and workers commuting to work, all sharing the street with cars and trucks because there are no sidewalks. So over the course of a year, we worked with first-year art students at Texas Tech University, which is where I was teaching at the time, to design and implement asphalt art project. And as part of this project, we went on numerous field trips to draw and study native flora. And our students designed a number of drafts that we shared in neighborhood meetings for feedbacks. Based on stakeholder feedback, designs were refined and submitted to the City of Lubbock's traffic engineer for approval. The engineer established many design constraints. White was one of the only permissible colors. We couldn't use red, yellow, green, and the crosswalk could only run east to west, and we could only paint within the newly established crosswalk lines. So taking all those constraints and the stakeholder feedback into consideration, we landed on this design that is based on the mesquite bean, and it was approved and painted a few years ago. And just this week, Lubbock and crosswalks were in the news because the state of Texas now says that you can't have crosswalk art. So they're removing the crosswalk art. We just learned about that like 2 days ago. Hopefully they'll replace the crosswalk art with a natural crosswalk. We don't know yet, though.
So this video is a walkthrough of the site after 3 years of growth. Weeds come into the world and stay with us.
This video is playing. This one doesn't. Okay. So this is a planting plan for the first volunteer site that we worked on. Each site is designed for biodiversity. We also take into consideration plant architecture. So we're looking at plant height and shape, and this sort of diagram shows you the various plant heights of the plants that we use in our designs. This is also a bloom calendar that shows what's in bloom, when it's in bloom, and you can see that our bloom period is from March all the way to November, so we get a lot of flowers all year round. And then these are the various planting zones for the various height and color plants in the first design. And this is just a portrait of some of the pollinators that frequent the mesquite mile. Just play that for a second.
All right. So the mesquite mile enacts small-scale disturbances that might draw both people and mesquite out of alienation, building a world of overlapping lifeways in which mutualistic transformation might be possible. These small shifts aim to construct good enough worlds, always imperfect, always under revision. These worlds in the making emphasize neighborliness and mutuality across difference. These are some of our neighbors and friends that donated their space and time to mesquite and its companions, showing that social relations between species is essential to good living in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood. And so what you're seeing now are video portraits of 4 sites in the 4th year of the project. So after several years of growth.
So this project couldn't have happened without lots of help. And this is sort of a slide reel, a slide as credit reel of all the people who donated their time and energy to the project. It also lists the organizations and funders that made the projects possible, including the residencies that gave us time, artist residencies that gave us time to reflect and test out our ideas with our peers. And there are a lot of names that we couldn't fit on the slide, but we had a really large number of consistent volunteers to the project to make it happen.
These books are some of our research references, not an exhaustive list. Feel free to reach out to us if you want our bibliography or some of our references.
Yeah. So we'll end with this line, weeds lie in wait. And we'd like to just thank you all for listening and for your interest in our practice. And I think now's the time to open up the lecture to questions. So I'm going to stop my screen share. All right.
So we can't hear anything.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
We can hear you now.
Oh, wow.
Is that good?
Sounds great, yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, well, I was just telling the room that we're going to have folks come down to the podium and ask questions so that y'all can interact a little more face-to-face than just a disembodied voice in the room. But I actually have a question to start. I'm curious, as you were designing the Mesquite Mile, thinking about like the relationship that time has to your process, and like obviously time and interaction with with nature. Like you have the plants are going to take time to grow. It's going to take time to collect the rainwater, but then also you were interacting with like bureaucracy in these ways of like having to talk to the city about the curb cuts and getting the crosswalks done and whatnot. So I'm just curious about what kind of relationships developed between y'all and time, and the time of nature and the time of bureaucracy. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Oh yeah, great question.
Yeah, I love that question.
Yeah, nature time is more fun than bureaucracy time. Sure.
Although both slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to start, when we initially sort of conceived of this idea, we didn't know how long-term it was going to be. We didn't know how many years we would continue the project. I think we were generally trying to think less in human years and more thinking in more than human timescales. So that like is an important, I think, shift because we are so human centric in our sense of time. So that's a stretch to think in the more than human timescales. And then bureaucratically, yes, things take a lot of time. Permissions take a lot of time to get from the city. Grants take a lot of time. We wrote so many grants. And I think it's interesting and sad to think of how much energy we put into writing grants to continue this project, and then to have like funding shifts change, and to essentially have the funding removed from the project years after I think those funds would have been allocated by a different administration. So it's kind of interesting to think about time in that frame as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the project, like on a day-to-day basis, looked like us like crawling around on the ground, looking at soil, hoping that seeds were sprouting and tracking sprouting seeds, or like in the greenhouse sprouting seeds and caring for seeds, and then also developing relationships with our neighbors. Like that was like a long-term engagement, like I think there were at the end sort of 5 fully planted sites, and on a maybe 3 days a week, we were going from site to site, checking on them and like helping manage, but also like hanging out with our friends who are friendships that were like developing over time with the people that volunteered their space, right? Like, and although we're not working on this project directly anymore, we still maintain those relationships with the people that we were working with. Like, I talked to one of the participants on the phone 2 days ago, and we're always sharing. We have like a WhatsApp group, and we text each other things, and
so we still get a sense of like how time is changing these living sites since we left Lubbock, Texas. And also time is just interesting when you think about a landscape and like, it doesn't look super lush all year round. It looks very different in the winter months. And I think it's interesting for us to kind of think about, what we're willing to tolerate in terms of what landscapes look like in the winter seasons, particularly like us societally, like what are we willing to tolerate and what colors are we willing to tolerate and what the landscape looks like. So I think this is a great question to think about time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone who has a question, please.
Hello. Sorry, I'm a bit short in the camera, but I had 2 questions. For the last slide about the books, it was cut off by a gray border. What were the last 2 books in that one slide?
Yeah, Symbiotic Planet by Lynn Margolis.
Okay.
And then there's a great, it's just one book from this series, but there's this really great publisher, I think it's the Center for Humans and Nature, and they did a series of books, and it's one of the books from that series called Partners, I think. And they're just like a collection of essays from an interdisciplinary field of writers and thinkers sort of writing about what does it mean to be a partner.
Should we reshare that slide?
Oh yeah, we can also we can do that. Let's see here if I can pull that up real quick. Sorry, 1 second. I have to. Do you want to ask your second one?
Oh yeah, I can ask the second one. So given that your time in Texas has produced said project, have you thought about doing other projects like in different states, such as, for example, for grasslands, you could do the grassland prairies of Kansas and Nebraska, and like other places like that, or would you rather go back to Washington and work on the old growth forests here in Washington State, like either near the Cascades or the Olympics, like the Olympic Mountains? Have you ever thought about doing a sort of research project based on these old plants that have also faced the scrutiny of being for land development and being used for land development and or being agricultural, and we have a lot of lumber companies as well that have just been chopping down a lot of the trees here in the West.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So I have, I guess, 2 ways to respond to that. One is that we currently live in California now. And we are interested in like continuing to research this global phenomenon of weediness, like where in whatever ways it manifests to us locally. So it's different now that we're in California. We're seeing different kinds of weediness here. It was important to us at the time in West Texas to work to sort of focus on our lived experience as people that lived in this particular neighborhood in Lubbock, especially when engaging in like a larger scale or longer project of that nature. We really wanted it to be situated in a place that we lived and had lived experience in. So that was important to that project. That said, I think as artists who travel around and do research, that we are interested in like continuing to use that like the local lens wherever we are to sort of explore these concepts. So yeah, if you have a cool place in Washington that you think we should be artists in residence in, like, yeah, send it along. We'll consider looking into different contexts and working locally wherever we are. So, and we're also getting this queued up to share this slide again in case it was too quick or if it was cut off.
Yeah. So here's the
It was,
plan.
yeah, the last two books.
Yeah, Planet Book. It's from their Kinship series, and then Symbiotic Planet by Lynn Margolis, who is an amazing biologist that studied like horizontal gene transfer and um, uh, wrote about the Gaia sort of theory. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I was born in Lubbock, Texas,
Oh.
and so
Wow.
this was really exciting to hear about. So I was wondering about, I remember being there as a little kid and it just being very dry and flat and kind of crusty. I don't know.
Sounds
And
right.
so, yeah, so I'm wondering about your feelings about making spaces, especially like outdoor spaces, especially for kind of children or like gathering places, and kind of the value of having an outdoor space to explore and kind of get acquainted with nature and like appreciating all of it has to offer. So
Yes, I feel like this is a really great like insider question of someone from Texas because Texas also just doesn't have a lot of public land.
it's
It really
true, yeah.
is very different. It's a very different context. So like for us in the city of Lubbock to get to like Caprock State Park, which is where the buffalo are, that's like a 1 hour and a half, 2 hour drive to the nearest public land. Like
Yeah.
outside of Lubbock is all agriculture. It's all private land. It is really hard to find public land that is like preserved or natural to what the landscape of the Llano Estacado is like. So I do think that was really an important part of this project was to recreate that shortgrass prairie system, and particularly in the urban core. In some of the sites, I'll call maybe two of them to mind. One, site 3, which is where the quadrats are, which is where the crosswalks were. That family did their own sort of like nature-based homeschool that yard. And so that yard was also sort of like a classroom. And you can see the way we designed it had like some tree stumps and things that were like little gathering nooks and things for people to sit and talk in that yard. So that one was definitely utilized in that way.
And I think like
I was thinking
3
about
out of 5 had children that lived on site. And they were essentially playgrounds, like adventure playgrounds for the kids.
But also in one of the neighbors, she's an older woman and she has some mobility challenges. And so for her, it was really important to like look outside and see a landscape that looked like some of the Canyonland, remember?
Yeah.
She would say like, oh, this looks like my own like canyon.
Yeah, there's like a slightly undeveloped area outside of Lubbock that big landowners sort of have access to, and she sort of would refer of that, that's how she talked about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lubbock connection.
Yeah.
Hi, me again. I think it's really interesting what you were talking about, like radical imagination and like exploring like utopian ideals and stuff like that. And I was wondering what like the transition between like the work you were doing before with the exercising like different parts of imagination and then this project was like. And then a second part to that is like how you see your work like changing. Like, do you think you're gonna continue doing like what you're doing with different plots of like land, or like how you think that idea is gonna manifest in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My first sort of response to the first question is I feel like there is a period of time where our research was looking at like looking at the idea of things or something, uh, and then the sort of Mesquite Mile project was more like action based or something. I don't know if that's a good answer, but like I feel like there's like a slight different. Like one was sort of like research about
Like a
these
theory versus practice.
theory versus practice, right? Um, Even though there were like moments of practice within those sort of exhibitions. But yeah, I would think of this sort of like large social ecological socially engaged practice project as more more practice than theory, but also theory based. And then what's next? I mean,
Yeah, I would just say we've always been, I think, our practice has always been research driven. And I think that's true from sort of the get-go of our early collaboration. So I think we're really inspired by and responding to whatever we are researching, and that has shifted over the years. Right now, we're really interested in these environmental humanities concepts and themes, and again, this theme of weediness. And so I think our practice may not take the same form. Like we may not be planting large plots of land here in California, but it maybe or it may not. Right now, we don't know. But I think like the central research questions are driven by our research. So we'll definitely continue that line of research and see how and what ways we can manifest it. We don't own property here in California. We did in Texas briefly. So I think like our practice was also influenced a little bit by that shift and like what happens when you like become invested in a neighborhood in a very different way, again, to timescale way. And then here, like what happens when we have to work, in a different, more nimble way, or we have to work differently because we aren't permanently involved in a neighborhood here. So
not as rooted.
Not as rooted currently. So we will see where the research questions take us. But thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. I was just going to say, I think also we spend so much time day to day managing that Mesquite Mile project that in a lot of ways collecting. I mean, like one maybe a researcher would say we were collecting all this data and now we're trying to make sense of all the things we did. I think that like we did research, practice, and now we're still reflecting on that practice, I think, and taking lessons from that experience, and hopefully that'll composted and become nutrients for something new soon. Currently composting, yeah. Should be the buffer. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you guys so much for talking to us today. I was really fascinated by your work, kind of the span of it, where the gallery work that involved education and like care and collaboration, and then moving into the neighborhoods. I am interested, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm interested in how the education of the plants worked within the whole neighborhood. I lived in this neighborhood once, and when I first moved in, immediately I had neighbors being like, you better mow your lawn or else those dandelions are going to get in my yard. And so I'm just wondering how these weeds kind of like found their way in like educating other people in the neighborhood and how that worked for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we had I guess one thing that we think about is we had that sort of like methodology slide where we're like, oh, we did this, and that. It was like multi-pronged, like always, like we were always doing things, and in some ways it was just like if we were checking up on every site multiple times a week, we would just be in we were just like public, like we were existing in public space. And, neighbors would be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing it that way? Or what's going on? So there's that piece. And then the other educational components were things like going to monthly sort of neighborhood meetings and talking to our neighbors about what we were proposing to do and getting feedback, doing sort of exhibitions like local exhibitions about the work. We had some reporters who wrote about us a little bit, which was another educational component beyond sort of our networks. The other thing that was really impactful for, I think, the success of the project was at the time, this is like really in the weeds, but at the time, there was some activism around the city that was trying to close down neighborhood schools, and we had an elementary school in the neighborhood, and that galvanized a lot of activism and neighborhood activism around like not closing down the neighborhood school. And we met a lot of people in that process. Like and some of the people who were leaders in that movement became some of the first volunteers of the project. And that also helped sort of get the word out about what we were doing. But then there are like the bureaucracy piece. There are all these city ordinances that restrict how you can use a yard. So we had to actively develop relationships with code inspectors to be like, this is what we're doing. This is cultivated. Like, if there's ever an issue with the yard, like you can reach out to the homeowners, but also you can reach out to us and we'll make sure that it's always in compliance. But just know that things are cultivated. It's not just a weedy
Yeah, I think
yard.
the word was cultivated. Like if it was over 3 feet tall and cultivated, it was okay. But if it wasn't cultivated, it wasn't okay. So like it's kind of, there's sort of a larger movement that's like kill your lawn type projects because they are really absurd in places like Lubbock, Texas, where like the amount of water and resource to maintain like a non-native turf grass yard is pretty absurd. And so there are ordinances that prevent people from doing much other than that because it's like, again, it's a question of like, what can the public people tolerate as like normal and acceptable of a look for a front yard? What will your neighbors tolerate? What will your neighborhood tolerate? These are all questions I think that come up during this kind of project, and they're unanswered because I think the absurdity is still revealing itself because there's also paradoxically a water shortage. And so in Lubbock, the last year we were there, they started like banning watering in your yard. Like you could only water in certain days of the week, otherwise you could get fined for overwatering your yard. On the other hand, you could get fined if you had these sort of like tall plants in your yard. So I think again, there's like an absurdity that's revealing itself. And I think the very act of these yards existing in the way that they do, which is without water, like shows that like, look at the abundance you can get if you just plant the plants that want to grow here in this compact soil without water. You can actually have like a really colorful, beautiful yard that has a lot of pollinators. So they're sort of like a living model of what can happen without water in a place like Lubbock, Texas.
Thank you guys so much. Yes, they do look like places where people can gather and be a part of. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us. I'm teaching a class right now where we're thinking about mass incarceration, and just this week we've been talking about kind of relations between environmental extraction and destruction and carceral landscapes, where fracking happens or where coal mining happens. And so we've been thinking at these kind of big systems levels, and to go back to a couple people's comments about bureaucracies and kind of, you could say in a way, bureaucracy as a medium, or one of your mediums, and this way in which your work is working between policy, bureaucracy, ecology, environmental science, environmental humanities, and yet you're working as artists. So you're kind of entangled with these ordinances, these questions you just mentioned of aesthetics, where we might have an aesthetic of a lawn that is absurd and at odds with the bioregion. And then we have policy that incentivizes and supports really ecologically damaging practices. And that is irrational, right? and so I wondered if you could just talk a bit about two things. One is kind of being artists, the choice to use social practice or use social practice art as the way to contest these omnicidal bureaucracies, ecocidal to say the least, and then also any kind of notions you have about scaling up, right? Like ways that these beautiful, potent, effective ideas that you're working with that are actually enacting remediation at these sites and repair could happen at scale. I mean, we more or less need to reorganize the entire global economy around remediation if we're going to get through this civilizational bottleneck. No pressure.
Thanks for that question and reflection.
Yeah.
So the first part is about being artist or using art as sort of a framework to engage in these spaces. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what sort of affordances does art have that maybe other sort of disciplines or approaches maybe don't have.
Right. Well, I would say first, like, yes, we're artists. We were trained as artists. We went to art school and studied art. So like that's our sensibility that we carry. And we sort of, I think, have the agency to like use or shed that label as we need to in the moment for either for grants or for fundraising or for whatever. So I think we like that's where we're comfortable operating in the space of art. But our collaborators in this project, some of them are coming from like landscape architecture and different disciplines that has different set of sensibilities and was certainly a lot more interested in things like scalability, and I think had the right like sort of tools and skill sets to model what that might look like if you were scaling up. I'm thinking about our collaborator Daniel Phillips worked with his landscape architecture students to actually like model to the scale of the city, like what green infrastructure interventions could look like if they were scaled up, and they
speculate,
like a speculative design challenge to do that and presented it to like city interest holders.
But I think just as artists, we were really interested in like the hyper local, like that's where we located our practice, at least for those 4 years, and trying to connect what was happening on the ground in our neighborhood to see these like global systems and finding relationship between those two things, and to sort of engage in relation with our neighbors around sort of some of our questions and interest, I guess. But
yeah, I just think of art as like a very liberatory space to work within, and so I think it's interesting, like how do you tell a story in a way that's compelling? Like the video work, the mesquite migration video work is kind of a beautiful like poem I think of as, like here's this like tree sort of meditatively being moved throughout a landscape. And I think one thing that art can do is sort of use these sort of Trojan horse like forms and like bring in all these other conversations into what is like a beautiful and poetic act, So I think I like that liberatory space of art to do things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
That's
amazing.
Good.
If I asked a question, do we have time? Thank you. Hi, I'm actually helping run the tech for the show, but I had a question because I also loved your presentation. I'm actually from Southern California, and I'm first of all, just curious where in California you're based, and if you're planning on doing any of this work in California, because to me it seems like, from what I know of the culture of where I'm from anyway, people might be very receptive to this sort of change and this sort of work, both from an art perspective and from an ecological perspective. So I'm curious if you've thought about working in the California area, wherever it is that you're located.
Yeah, we are located in San Luis Obispo, which is like right in the middle. It's like 3 hours to LA, 3 hours to San Francisco. So it's a very different context here. I see that municipal projects are encouraged here in California are like encouraging homeowners to plant like water wise. They're like actually incentivizing it here. The municipal governments are in a way that just wasn't true in Lubbock. So I think it's just there's different political reality and different situation here that we'd be working within.
And then, the one thing that is interesting is, I don't have the data to support this, but anecdotally I can sort of say generally, like in Lubbock, there's like a lot of unmanaged space, like in the urban core of the city. Like, on a block, you might have 9 houses that are occupied and 2 that are unoccupied. And, there's like unmanaged space. There's a lot of like city-owned unmanaged space or industry that has left the city and it's just like empty buildings and parking lots. So a lot of unmanaged space for weeds to sort of emerge spontaneously and start to come back and create new novel urban ecosystems. Where we're currently located, because property is so valuable, the amount of unmanaged urban space is very small. And so right now, I think one thing that is interesting is where is that unmanaged space? And what are the novel urban ecosystems that are emerging in those spaces? And we're just beginning to kind of like document and understand that relationship to this place because
we have noticed like there's a San Luis Obispo is built around this like creek, and we have noticed we've been taking note that the creek is like one of the weediest places in town, and it's kind of like screened off from public and from private property owners, but like there's like a weedy creek that has a lot of weedy trees, like the tree of heaven, like eucalyptus trees in California are a big, I think, weedy tree that there's interest. I'm kind of interested in them. So we're looking at like, what are these novel ecosystems? What are these unmanaged spaces? And like what sort of conditions of weediness can we sort of like tap into or look at? And I think it'll look different here because again, there's in some ways a lot less need for this kind of work that we're doing in Lubbock here in California because it's incentivized and because like the political will is different here, we'll say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thanks.
Last call. Oh yeah, we have one. I think we have time for one more quick one. So one more coming up.
Hi, thank you guys. I loved your presentation. I was wondering if for like potential future projects you might engage in, if you're more interested in trying to find areas that, like Ludwig, where there wasn't a lot of incentive through the government or local interest, or more so with local interest, but less with government, to find areas that are maybe more disturbed and have less government backing, like where you are now.
Yeah, I think that for us, it's important that wherever we're going to be working or doing any interventions, we do like to really tap into our lived experience. And so for us now living here in California, I don't know that we'd want to go looking around for places that we weren't familiar with or weren't from or didn't have like lived experience with to sort of like go necessarily and do interventions at a larger scale. Maybe like in a smaller scale in like a sort of like researchy prototype way, I think we'd be more interested in working context by context if we were in like a artist residency or something where we were invited. So I don't think we'd go like shopping around, but again, the scale and like the sort of on the ground knowledge and familiarity with have like a lot of impact on how and where we would consider working in this way.
I will say we haven't lived this close to the Pacific Ocean before, and this is sort of a dream that I have, but is to learn how to scuba dive because the purple sea urchin is sort of, because warming coastal waters is becoming this dominant sort of creature that's destroying habitat in the ocean and eating a bunch of blow up kelp. And there's the southern sea otters down here, which is an endangered charismatic megaflora mammal. So I'm like, I would like to probably learn to scuba dive just to see what's happening in a non-terrestrial space underwater to see what's going on, and maybe do a little bit of weeding in the ocean. I don't know.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, still exploring weediness, local tips.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Erin and Travis and everyone in the room. Can we get one more big round of applause for our artists? I did bring some of the zines that Erin and Travis made for the exhibition. Yay, matching across distances. And I have some down at the front if anybody would like to grab. And the show is up in Gallery Photoland until December 14th. Thank you again.
Thanks everyone for all your questions and attention. It was so wonderful.
And yes,